I'm unstoppable with God. There will come a moment in your life when you realize that the thing you were afraid of was never as powerful as you believed it was. Not the rejection, not the failure, not the empty bank account, not the closed door, not the opinion of people, not the mistake you made 5 years ago, not the season of your life that seemed to have no explanation. You will realize that what looked like the end was sometimes only the place where your strength was being developed. And there is something else you need to understand. You were never meant to walk through this life believing that you are powerful because you have everything under control. You are powerful because you have learned where to place your trust when you do not. There are nights when you will lie in your bed and stare into darkness, wondering how you are going to solve tomorrow. There are mornings when you will wake up already tired. There are seasons when you will pray and hear nothing. There are moments when you will do everything you know to do and still watch the door remain closed. And that is where many people misunderstand faith. They think faith means you never become afraid. No, faith means fear does not get to make your decisions. Faith means you can be afraid and still move. Faith means you can cry and still believe. Faith means you can be disappointed and still refuse to become bitter. Faith means you can lose something without believing you have lost yourself. And perhaps the most important realization is this. You do not become unstoppable because life stops hurting you. You become unstoppable when pain no longer has the authority to determine who you become. Think about that. Because somewhere listening right now is a person who has been allowing one chapter of their life to define the entire book. One rejection, one failure, one betrayal, one financial struggle, one mistake, one missed opportunity, one season of loneliness, one person who said, you can't. And you've been carrying that sentence around like it was a prophecy. But it wasn't a prophecy. It was a sentence spoken by a human being. And human beings can be wrong. People can misunderstand you. People can underestimate you. People can walk away from you. People can close doors in your face. People can judge the chapter they saw without knowing the chapters they never witnessed. But God sees what people cannot see. God sees the nights you kept going. God sees the battle nobody applauded. God sees the discipline nobody noticed. God sees the prayer you whispered when you didn't even have the strength to speak loudly. God sees the tears. God sees the effort. God sees the intention. And sometimes the greatest transformation in your life begins when you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin asking, what is this season trying to develop in me? That is a different question. And a different question can change an entire life, because if you believe every difficult season is proof that God has abandoned you, then every obstacle becomes evidence against your future. But if you believe difficulty can become preparation, then the obstacle becomes part of the training. The closed door becomes a lesson. The delay becomes development. The rejection becomes redirection. The struggle becomes strength. The waiting becomes preparation. And the pain becomes something you can eventually carry without allowing it to crush you. But let me tell you something that people don't like to hear. Sometimes God will not remove the mountain immediately. Sometimes you are going to have to climb. Sometimes you will pray for strength, and instead of making the road easier, you will discover that you have become stronger. Sometimes you will pray for courage and discover that courage requires you to stand in the middle of something that scares you. Sometimes you will pray for patience, and suddenly you are placed in a season where patience is the only option. And you will wonder, God, why didn't you change the situation? And perhaps the deeper answer is, because he was changing you. Let me tell you about a man who had spent years believing that his life had gone completely wrong. He had worked hard. He had responsibilities. He had dreams. But one decision destroyed a major opportunity The business he had worked toward collapsed. People who had once called him a friend stopped answering his calls. Bills started arriving faster than money. His confidence disappeared. And every morning he woke up with the same thought, I failed. Not, I experienced failure. I am a failure. That difference nearly destroyed him. Because failure is an event. But when you turn failure into identity, you start behaving as though your future has already been decided. He became hesitant. He stopped taking opportunities. He stopped speaking confidently. He stopped making plans. He started protecting himself from disappointment by refusing to hope. One evening, sitting alone in his car, he finally admitted something he had been avoiding. He wasn't only afraid of failing again. He was afraid of believing again. Because believing again meant there was something to lose. And that is where many people are today. They don't lack dreams. They lack permission to dream again. They have been hurt so deeply that they have made disappointment their protection. They say, I don't expect anything anymore. But sometimes what sounds like realism is simply fear wearing sophisticated clothing. I don't care. Maybe you care. You can't trust anybody. Maybe you were betrayed. Nothing ever works for me. Maybe you've had difficult experiences. I'll try later. Maybe you're afraid that trying now will expose how much you actually want it. And then there is the sentence that quietly destroys potential. Maybe I'm just not meant for this. Who told you? Who gave you that verdict? Was it your worst day? Was it one person's rejection? Was it the voice in your own head after too many disappointments? Or did you simply repeat the thought so many times that eventually you stopped questioning it? Think about this carefully. A thought repeated often enough can begin to feel like truth. But feelings are not always facts. Fear can feel like wisdom. Laziness can disguise itself as exhaustion. Procrastination can disguise itself as preparation. Comfort can disguise itself as peace. And sometimes doubt can disguise itself as humility. I don't want to get too confident. No. Maybe you're afraid to discover what happens if you actually try. There is a difference between humility and self-rejection. Humility says, I don't know everything, but I am willing to learn. Self-rejection says, I probably can't. Humility keeps you growing. Self-rejection keeps you small. And when you begin to understand that your identity is not determined by yesterday, something begins to change. You stop waking up asking, what happened to me? You start asking, what am I going to do with what happened to me? That question is powerful because you may not be able to change what happened, but you can decide what it produces. A broken relationship can produce bitterness or wisdom. A financial struggle can produce shame or discipline. A rejection can produce insecurity or resilience. A failure can produce fear or humility. A difficult season can produce despair or dependence on God. And this is where your faith becomes more than words. It becomes a way of living. Because saying, I trust God when everything is going well is easy. But what does your trust look like when the answer is delayed? What does your faith look like when you have prayed and the situation still hasn't changed? What does your character look like when nobody is watching? What do you do when the applause disappears? What do you do when nobody believes in the vision except you and God? That is where something real begins. Because anyone can be motivated when everything is working. The deeper test is whether you can remain faithful when nothing seems to be moving. There was another young woman who spent years waiting for one opportunity. She watched people around her succeed. One friend got the promotion. Another started a business. Another bought a home. Another seemed to have the relationship she wanted. And every celebration became complicated. She was happy for them, but somewhere inside she kept asking, when is it going to be my turn? Have you ever felt that? You scroll through your phone and everybody appears to be moving forward. Somebody is traveling. Somebody is getting married. Somebody is becoming successful. Somebody is announcing a new business. Somebody is celebrating a dream you have been praying about for years. And suddenly, your own life looks small. But social media gives you other people's highlights and asks you to compare them with your behind the scenes. That's an unfair comparison. You don't know what someone sacrificed. You don't know what they are dealing with privately. You don't know whether what you envy is even good for you. And you certainly don't know the timing of your own story. A seed does not become a tree because you stare at it angrily. Growth has a process. And sometimes the most frustrating season is the season when roots are growing where nobody can see them. Think about a tree. The strongest part of the tree may be underground. Nobody applauds roots. Nobody takes pictures of roots. Nobody says, look how beautiful the roots are. But without them, the tree cannot stand. Maybe your hidden season is not wasted. Maybe you're building roots. Maybe the discipline you're developing in private is preparing you for responsibility in public. Maybe the loneliness is teaching you how to stop depending on validation. Maybe the delay is forcing you to become capable instead of merely excited. Maybe the struggle is teaching you to manage what you once prayed to receive, because receiving something you are not prepared to carry can become another kind of problem. You can pray for money, but can you manage money? You can pray for influence, but can you handle criticism? You can pray for success, but can you remain humble? You can pray for opportunity. But can you maintain discipline after the opportunity arrives? You can pray for a larger life, but are you becoming the person capable of living it? This is where faith and responsibility meet. Faith does not mean sitting still and expecting life to change without your participation. Faith gives you the courage to participate. You pray, then you prepare, you trust, then you work, you believe. Then you move, you ask God for direction, and then you pay attention to what your daily behavior is saying. Because sometimes people say they want a different life while practicing the same habits that created their current life. They want confidence, but constantly speak negatively about themselves. They want financial freedom, but spend without discipline. They want health, but negotiate with every uncomfortable habit. They want a stronger relationship, but refuse to communicate. They want peace, but consume chaos every morning. They want purpose, but spend hours distracting themselves. And then they ask why nothing changes. Your life eventually becomes an honest reflection of what you repeatedly do, not what you occasionally intend. Repeated behavior, repeated choices, repeated thoughts, repeated compromises, repeated discipline. That is where your future is being built, one ordinary day at a time. And that should both encourage you and challenge you, because your current life may not change overnight. But your direction can change today. A ship can change direction by a few degrees and end up somewhere completely different. Your life works the same way. One decision, one habit, one boundary, one prayer, 1 hour of focused work, one honest conversation, one refusal to return to an old pattern. Small decisions seem insignificant when you make them, but they become enormous when they compound. Imagine meeting yourself 3 years from now. You walk into a room and there you are, older, different, carrying the consequences of everything you repeatedly did. What would that future version of you say? Would they thank you? Or would they ask why you kept postponing your life? Would they say, thank you for taking care of your mind? Or why did you keep feeding yourself negativity? Would they say, thank you for learning? Or why did you keep choosing entertainment over growth? Would they say, thank you for trusting God during that difficult season? Or would they ask, why did you allow fear to make every decision? You are creating that person right now, not someday. Right now, the future is being built inside ordinary Tuesdays, inside mornings when nobody is watching, inside evenings when you could either keep scrolling or work on something meaningful. inside moments when you could make an excuse or keep a promise to yourself. And here is something deeper. You cannot build an unstoppable life with a negotiable character. If every uncomfortable moment causes you to abandon your standards, then your future will always be controlled by your mood. You cannot build a strong life if your commitments depend how you feel. There will be days when you feel inspired. There will also be days when you feel nothing. The mature person learns to continue anyway, not because they are a machine, because they have learned that feelings are visitors. Commitment is a decision. And when God becomes the foundation of that commitment, you stop believing you need to control every outcome before taking the next step. You don't need to know the entire staircase. You need enough light for the next step. And that is difficult for people who want certainty. We want the entire map. We want guarantees. We want to know that if we work hard, we will succeed. If we love, we will never be hurt. If we pray, the answer will arrive exactly when we want. If we make the right decision, nothing will go wrong. But life doesn't give you those guarantees. Faith asks you to walk without possessing complete information. That is why faith develops a different kind of strength. The strength to move without knowing, the strength to wait without quitting, the strength to continue without applause, the strength to trust without controlling. And perhaps that is why some of your greatest lessons came during seasons you would never have chosen. You didn't choose the disappointment. You didn't choose the rejection. You didn't choose the loss. But now you have a choice about what comes next. Let me ask you something. What if the thing you call your weakness is actually the doorway to a different kind of strength? Maybe you've always been sensitive. You thought that was weakness. But sensitivity can become compassion. Maybe you've failed publicly. You thought that made you unworthy. But failure can teach humility that success never could. Maybe you had to start over. You thought you were behind. But starting over can force you to build on truth instead of illusion. Maybe you've spent years being overlooked. You thought nobody valued you. But being overlooked can teach you to stop depending on recognition. There are things you can only learn when nobody is clapping. And there are strengths you can only develop when you have no audience. That is why your hidden life matters. Who are you when nobody can reward you? Who are you when nobody can punish you? Who are you when you could easily get away with the wrong choice? That is character. And character becomes the foundation of confidence. Real confidence isn't walking into a room thinking you're better than everyone. Real confidence is walking into a room knowing that whatever happens, you will remain yourself. You know what you stand for. You know what you will not compromise. You know where your strength comes from. And you know that rejection cannot destroy your worth. That is freedom. There was a man who spent years chasing approval. He changed his opinions depending on who was around. He said yes when he wanted to say no. He accepted disrespect because he was terrified of being alone. He worked jobs he hated because he wanted people to think he was successful. He purchased things he couldn't comfortably afford because he wanted to look successful. And eventually he had what appeared to be a good life from the outside. But internally, he was exhausted. One day someone asked him a simple question. If nobody could see your life, what would you change? He couldn't answer because he had spent so long building a life for an audience that he had forgotten how to build one for his soul. That question is worth asking yourself. If nobody could see your achievements, would you still pursue them? If nobody praised your discipline, would you still practice it? If nobody knew you were successful, would you still become successful? If nobody knew you were generous, would you still give? If nobody knew you were strong, would you still choose courage? Because eventually you discover something uncomfortable. Living for approval is a form of slavery. You wake up asking what people think. You make decisions based on what people will say. You compare your progress with strangers. You measure your worth through numbers. And every compliment gives you a temporary high while every criticism becomes a threat. But when your identity becomes anchored deeper than public opinion, something changes. You can hear criticism without collapsing. You can receive praise without becoming addicted to it. You can be misunderstood without immediately defending yourself. You can walk away from what is wrong without needing everyone to understand why. And you can keep moving when the crowd isn't cheering. That's what it means to become difficult to stop. Not because you never encounter resistance, because resistance no longer automatically changes your direction. Now think about your habits. Most people imagine transformation as one dramatic moment. They imagine waking up one morning, suddenly disciplined, confident, focused, wealthy, healthy, and spiritually strong. But transformation usually feels much less dramatic. It feels like getting up when you don't want to. It feels like saying no to something nobody would have known you said no to. It feels like closing the screen. It feels like keeping the promise. It feels like choosing prayer over panic. It feels like choosing work over another excuse. It feels like taking a walk when your mind tells you to stay in bed. It feels ordinary. And that is why people underestimate it. They are looking for fireworks while transformation is happening through repetition. You don't become disciplined by thinking about discipline. You become disciplined by repeatedly doing what you said you would do. You don't become courageous by waiting until fear disappears. You become courageous by acting while fear is present. You don't become confident by telling yourself you're amazing every morning. You become confident by collecting evidence that you can trust yourself. Every promise you keep is evidence. Every difficult thing you finish is evidence. Every temptation you resist is evidence. Every time you recover from failure is evidence. Every time you refuse to return to an old version of yourself is evidence. And slowly, quietly, your identity changes. You begin to say, I am someone who follows through. I am someone who can endure. I am someone who can learn. I am someone who can begin again. I am someone who trusts God even when I don't understand the timing. That last one matters because perhaps the deepest form of strength is not believing that everything will happen exactly as you want. It is believing that your life can still have meaning when it doesn't. There will be disappointments. There will be unanswered questions. There will be seasons where you do not understand the reason. You may never receive an explanation for everything, and you must learn to live without requiring one. Otherwise, you will spend your life waiting for an explanation before allowing yourself to move forward. Sometimes peace comes before understanding. Sometimes healing comes before answers. Sometimes you have to release the question long enough to receive the next instruction. And maybe there is something you are still carrying that you were never meant to carry forever. A conversation, a betrayal, a mistake, a regret, a version of yourself. You keep revisiting the past as though replaying it can change it. It cannot. But you can change what the memory means. You can say, that happened. Instead of that defines me. You can say, I made a mistake. Instead of, I am a mistake. You can say, I lost something. Instead of, I have lost everything. Language matters because the mind listens. And what you repeatedly tell yourself becomes the atmosphere in which you live. Imagine waking up for 5 years and telling yourself, I can't. Imagine 5 years of hearing, I'm behind. I'm unlucky. I'm not talented. People don't respect me. Nothing works. Eventually, your brain begins to build a world around those assumptions. Now imagine 5 years of a different internal conversation. I can learn. I can improve. I can begin again. I can ask for help. I can work. I can endure. I can trust God. I can take the next step. You are not pretending that problems don't exist. You're refusing to let problems become your identity. And there is a major difference. Optimism says everything is fine. Faith can say everything is not fine, but I am not alone. That is stronger. Because it doesn't require denial, it requires trust. And trust becomes especially powerful when circumstances are unstable. Think about a person in a storm. The storm is real. The waves are real. The wind is real. But the presence of a strong anchor changes the situation. The anchor doesn't make the storm disappear. It keeps the storm from deciding where the vessel goes. Your circumstances can be loud. Your emotions can be loud. Your fears can be loud. But your foundation can be deeper than all three. And when you understand that, you stop demanding that every day feel good. You start asking whether every day is moving you towards something good. That changes how you approach discomfort. You stop asking, how do I avoid this? And start asking, what can I learn here? You stop asking, why is this hard? And start asking, what kind of person does this require me to become? That question can turn an obstacle into training. Consider the person who wants to become financially stable. They don't need another inspirational quote. They need to learn how money works. They need to stop spending emotionally. They need to increase their skills. They need patience. They need consistency. They need to distinguish between wanting something and being prepared for it. The same is true with health. The same is true with relationships. The same is true with spiritual maturity. The same is true with every meaningful area of life. Prayer is powerful. But prayer does not excuse responsibility. You can ask God for wisdom and then refuse to learn. You can ask for provision and then refuse to manage what you already have. You can ask for a better future and then spend every day feeding the habits that destroy it. Faith and action belong together, not because your actions control God. Because your actions reveal what you are willing to do with what you have been given. There is something else most people don't understand about being unstoppable. You must become comfortable being misunderstood. Because when you change, some people will not recognize you. The version of you who always said yes was convenient. The version who accepted disrespect was easy to control. The version who never had boundaries was predictable. When you begin growing, some people will say, you've changed. And sometimes they will say it like an accusation. Yes, you have changed. That's the point. You were not created to remain exactly who you were 5 years ago. Growth changes your vocabulary. Growth changes your priorities. Growth changes your friendships. Growth changes how you spend your mornings. Growth changes what you tolerate. Growth changes what you consider success. Growth changes what you are willing to sacrifice. And sometimes growth changes who can walk beside you. That hurts. Don't pretend it doesn't. Outgrowing people can be painful. Leaving environments can be painful. Breaking habits can be painful. But pain is not always proof that you're making the wrong decision. Sometimes pain is the sensation of separation from an old identity. And you must learn the difference between pain that warns you and pain that grows you. Not every difficult road is your road, but not every difficult road is a wrong road either. Wisdom is knowing the difference. That is why you need more than motivation. You need discernment. You need the ability to pause, to pray, to think, to observe, to ask better questions. Because being unstoppable does not mean running everywhere. Sometimes being unstoppable means refusing to move until you know the direction. There are people exhausted because they confuse activity with progress. They're busy all day. But busy doing what? They answer messages, watch videos, switch between apps, make plans, talk about goals, write about productivity, buy notebooks, create schedules. And at the end of the day, the important work remains untouched. Activity can become another form of avoidance. You can spend your entire day preparing to start. At some point, you have to start. And starting rarely feels perfect. Your first attempt may be ugly. Your first video may be average. Your first business idea may fail. Your first workout may feel embarrassing. Your first conversation may be uncomfortable. Your first disciplined week may collapse. That's okay. You are not required to be excellent on day one. You are required to be willing to become excellent through repetition. This is where many people quit. They compare their beginning with somebody else's middle. They see the polished result, but never see the years of awkward attempts. They see the confidence, but not the uncertainty that came before it. They see the harvest, but not the season when nothing seemed to be happening. And they quit too early. What if the breakthrough was closer than they realized? What if they were one more attempt away? What if the next conversation would have changed everything? What if the next skill they learned would have opened the next door? You don't know. That's why you keep moving wisely, not blindly, wisely. You take the next step, then another, and another. And sometimes the path becomes visible only after you start walking. Now imagine your life 1 year from today. Not the fantasy version. The realistic version, suppose nothing changes. Same habits, same excuses, same sleep schedule, same distractions, same spending, same relationships, same internal dialogue, same avoidance. Where will you be? Don't answer quickly. Really see it. Imagine the room, imagine your health, imagine your bank account, imagine your confidence, imagine your skills. Imagine the opportunities you didn't pursue. Imagine the conversations you avoided. Imagine the goals you postponed. Now imagine another version, not perfect, just different. You wake up earlier. You spend less time consuming and more time creating. You pray consistently. You work on your craft. You control your spending. You exercise. You read. You protect your attention. You keep promises to yourself. You recover faster from failure. You stop begging for validation. You choose better environments. You become calmer, more disciplined, more patient, more capable. 1 year. The difference may not be dramatic on day one, but after hundreds of decisions, it becomes visible. That's compound growth. And compound growth works both ways. Neglect compounds, discipline compounds, debt compounds, investment compounds, resentment compounds, gratitude compounds, fear compounds, courage compounds. A small lie repeated becomes a dishonest character. A small promise kept repeatedly becomes integrity. A small distraction repeated becomes a distracted life. A small act of focus repeated becomes mastery. You are always compounding something. The question is, what? And there is a deeper question. Who are you becoming while you're getting what you're getting? Because goals are not enough. You can achieve something and still be internally empty. You can become wealthy and remain anxious. You can become successful and remain insecure. You can become admired and remain lonely. You can gain attention and lose peace. So don't only ask God for the destination, ask for the character required to carry it, because the greatest gift may not be getting everything you asked for. It may be becoming someone who can receive what is truly meant for you without destroying yourself with it. There is a kind of strength that money cannot buy. The ability to remain calm when criticized. The ability to walk away from temptation. The ability to forgive without returning to unhealthy patterns. The ability to work without applause. The ability to rest without guilt. The ability to say no without explaining yourself for an hour. The ability to admit when you're wrong. The ability to change your mind when new wisdom arrives. The ability to keep going when progress is invisible. The ability to trust God when the calendar says you should already have an answer. That kind of strength is built slowly. And perhaps you are in the building season right now. Maybe that's why it feels uncomfortable. You are under construction. And construction is noisy, dusty, messy, unfinished. Nobody looks at a building site and says, what a beautiful final product. Because it isn't finished, Maybe you are judging yourself for looking unfinished. Of course you look unfinished. You're alive. You're learning. You're becoming. The mistake is expecting yourself to already be the person you are in the process of becoming. Give yourself room to grow. But don't use grace as an excuse to stay the same. Both are necessary. Grace says you can begin again. Responsibility says you must begin again. Grace says your worst moment is not your identity. Responsibility says your next choices still matter. Faith says God can meet you where you are. Discipline says you don't have to remain there. And there is tremendous power in holding both truths at once. You are loved, and you still need to grow. You are valuable, and you still need to improve. You are forgiven, and you still need to change your behavior. You are not alone, and you still have responsibility. That balance creates maturity. Now let me take you somewhere deeper. What happens when you stop asking God to make your life easier and start asking Him to make you stronger? Think about how different that prayer is. God, remove every difficult person, versus God, teach me how to respond with wisdom. God, make every obstacle to disappear, versus God, give me courage and discernment. God, make me successful, versus God, develop the character necessary for meaningful success. The second prayer changes you. And when you change, your relationship with the problem changes. The same challenge can meet a different person. A fearful person sees a mountain and freezes. A trained person sees a mountain and starts planning the climb. A bitter person sees rejection and says they don't know what they're missing. A mature person asks, what can I learn from this? A distracted person sees an hour and spends it. A disciplined person sees an hour and invests it. A person without direction sees pain and asks how to escape. A person with purpose asks what the pain is teaching. Your circumstances matter, but the person you bring into those circumstances matters too. And God can work through that person. That's why you cannot keep waiting for the perfect conditions. There will always be another reason to delay. Too busy, too tired, too old, too young, too broke, too inexperienced, too embarrassed. Too late. But too late is often one of the most dangerous lies. Look at how many people begin meaningful things later than expected. People change careers, start businesses, repair relationships, learn skills, return to education, rebuild finances, strengthen their faith, begin exercising, write books, equate art, with others. The timeline may not look like the one they imagined. But a different timeline is not necessarily a failed timeline. Sometimes you are comparing your life with a schedule God never gave you. And comparison can make you despise a perfectly meaningful chapter. You wanted the harvest, but you're in the planting season. You wanted the answer, but you're in the preparation season. You wanted recognition, but you're in the character season. You wanted the open door, but you're learning how to become ready for the room behind it. Don't despise preparation because it is quiet. The world celebrates arrival. God often develops people in obscurity, and obscurity can be a gift. When nobody is watching, you discover whether you actually believe what you say. When nobody is praising you, you discover why you're doing it. When nobody is forcing you, you discover your discipline. When nobody is rescuing you, you discover your resourcefulness. When the noise disappears, you can finally hear what matters. That's why solitude can become powerful. Not isolation, solitude. A place where you can think without everybody else's opinions entering your mind. A place where you can pray without performance. A place where you can ask, what am I becoming? What am I avoiding? What am I pretending not to know? What habit is quietly destroying my future? What responsibility am I blaming someone else for? What would I do differently if I stopped being afraid of people's opinions? Those questions can hurt. But sometimes healing begins with an honest question. And honesty is one of the foundations of transformation. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. If you're distracted, admit it. If you're undisciplined, admit it. If you're bitter, admit it. If you're afraid, admit it. If you're addicted to approval, admit it. If you've wasted time, admit it. Not to shame yourself, to stop lying to yourself. You don't need shame. You need truth. Shame says, you're terrible. Truth says, this behavior is costing you and it needs to change. There is hope in truth because truth gives you something you can work with. And once you see the truth, you can choose. You can choose a different morning, a different response, a different habit, a different friend, a different environment, a different conversation, a different use of your attention, a different relationship with your phone, a different relationship with your money, a different relationship with your time. And slowly, your life starts to move. Not because everything becomes easy, because you become less available to the things that once controlled you. That is freedom. Imagine the day when temptation doesn't control you anymore. Imagine when somebody insults you and you don't spend 3 days replaying it. Imagine when rejection hurts but doesn't define you. Imagine when you can sit alone without desperately needing distraction. Imagine when you can receive success without needing everyone to know. Imagine when you can fail without believing you are finished. Imagine when you can wait without panicking. Imagine when your peace is no longer dependent on circumstances behaving perfectly. That person is possible, but that person is built. And building takes repetition. There will be days when you do everything right and still feel discouraged. Don't confuse lack of immediate emotion with lack of progress. A farmer doesn't dig up a seed every morning to check whether it's growing. Sometimes the work is underground. You study, you practice, you pray, you save, you train, you prepare, you wait. And then one day something becomes visible, but the visible result is usually the product of invisible repetition. That is why you must learn to respect the process. Not worship the process. Respect it. Because the process is where your character is tested, and perhaps the hardest test is continuing when nobody can guarantee the outcome. That is where faith becomes personal, not borrowed, not inherited. Not something you say because other people say it. Personal. You have to discover what trust means in your own difficult season. There may come a night when nobody can talk you out of fear. Nobody can give you certainty. Nobody can promise tomorrow will be easier. And you have to decide what you will believe in that room. That decision can become one of the defining moments of your life. Because when everything external becomes uncertain, your internal foundation becomes visible. And maybe you are being invited into a deeper kind of courage. Not the courage to control everything. The courage to release what you cannot control while taking responsibility for what you can. You can control whether you show up. You can control whether you tell the truth. You can control whether you learn. You can control whether you forgive. You can control whether you prepare. You can control whether you protect your attention. You can control whether you continue practicing. You cannot control everybody's opinion. You cannot control every outcome. You cannot control every delay. You cannot control another person's choices. You cannot control tomorrow. And trying to control uncontrollable things is one of the fastest ways to destroy peace. Do what is yours, release what is not, pray over what you cannot control, work on what you can, and keep walking. There is something strangely powerful about a person who has stopped fighting battles that were never theirs. They don't need to prove everything. They don't need to respond to everything. They don't need to explain every decision. They don't need revenge. They don't need to win every argument. They have learned that peace is sometimes more valuable than being understood. And that does not make them weak. It makes them selective. You don't have to fight every battle to prove you're strong. A river doesn't argue with every stone. It keeps moving. That's what you need to learn. Keep moving. Not recklessly, not desperately, with direction, with wisdom, with faith, with discipline. There will be moments when you fall. You will have bad days. You will break promises to yourself. You will procrastinate. You will say something you regret. You will lose focus. You will become discouraged. Don't turn one bad day into an identity. The dangerous thought is, I already messed up, so I might as well continue. No. One bad meal doesn't destroy your health. One missed workout doesn't destroy your fitness. One bad financial decision doesn't have to destroy your future. One failure doesn't have to become your biography. Return quickly. The faster you return, the less damage the mistake compounds. This is another form of discipline, not perfection, recovery. A mature person doesn't need to be flawless. They need to be able to return to the plan, return to prayer, return to discipline, return to truth, return to the work. Return to the person you said you wanted to become, and every return makes you stronger. Now think about 5 years from now. 5 years is a long time when you compound the right things. What skill could you develop? What debt could you eliminate? What relationship could you repair? What habit could disappear? What strength could you build? What level of spiritual maturity could develop? What kind of person could you become? And then ask the harder question, what happens if you keep postponing? 5 years of procrastination is not a small thing. 5 years of distraction is not a small thing. 5 years of bitterness is not a small thing. 5 years of financial irresponsibility is not a small thing. 5 years of avoiding your calling is not a small thing. Time doesn't shout while it leaves. That's what makes it dangerous. It whispers, another day, another week, another month, another year, and suddenly you look back and realize you have been waiting for your life to begin. Don't wait for a dramatic sign to take ordinary responsibility seriously. Your life is happening now. This hour matters. This conversation matters. This decision matters. This habit matters. And perhaps the most important thing you can do is stop treating ordinary days like they are disposable. Ordinary days become your life. You don't get a separate life later. You get this one. And the question isn't whether every day will be extraordinary. The question is whether ordinary days are moving you towards something meaningful. Because the person you become tomorrow is being trained by what you tolerate today. What you repeatedly consume becomes part of your thinking. What you repeatedly think becomes part of your emotional world. What you repeatedly do becomes part of your character. And character eventually shapes destiny. That's why protecting your mind matters. Not every opinion deserves access. Not every argument deserves your energy. Not every piece of content deserves your attention. Not every invitation deserves your yes. Your attention is a resource. Spend it like one. If someone had access to your bank account, you would care what they were doing with your money. Why do you allow random people to have unlimited access to your attention? Protect it. Because where attention goes, energy follows. And where energy goes, results begin to appear. This is why your environment matters. If you surround yourself with people who constantly normalize excuses, discipline will feel strange. If you surround yourself with people who value growth, growth becomes normal. If your environment celebrates as distraction, focus becomes difficult. If your environment respects learning, learning becomes natural. You are not completely powerless against your environment. You can change rooms, change routines, change inputs, change relationships. Change what you watch. Change what you listen to. Change what you discuss. You don't need to hate your old environment. You simply need to recognize when it is no longer helping you become who you are called to become. And there may be people who don't understand. Let them misunderstand. Your responsibility is not to make everyone comfortable with your growth. Your responsibility is to grow with integrity. There is a point where you stop explaining and start demonstrating. Don't tell everyone you're changing. Challenge. Don't announce your discipline. Practice it. Don't argue about your future. Build it. Don't beg people to believe in you. Let time reveal what consistency creates. And when the results begin to appear, remember the season when nobody saw them, not to become arrogant, to become grateful. Because you will remember the nights when you wondered if your effort mattered. You will remember the days when progress was invisible. You will remember the small decisions. And perhaps you'll realize that what looked insignificant at the time was actually building the foundation. That's why you cannot despise small beginnings. A small beginning is still a beginning. A small step is still movement. A small prayer is still a conversation. A small act of discipline is still evidence. A small amount saved is still a habit. A small amount learned is still knowledge. A small act of courage is still courage. Don't wait to become powerful before you start acting responsibly. Act responsibly, and power develops. There is another trap I want you to recognize. Sometimes people become so focused on becoming unstoppable that they forget to become peaceful. They chase, they grind, they push, they achieve, but inside they are terrified. That is not freedom. If your success requires constant anxiety, you have built a prison with better furniture. You need ambition and peace, discipline and rest, work and reflection, courage and wisdom, faith and responsibility. You don't need to destroy yourself to prove that you're serious. You need to become sustainable. Because what good is a powerful year if you cannot sustain it? What good is extreme discipline for 2 weeks, followed by complete collapse? Consistency beats intensity when intensity cannot be maintained. Build a life you can continue living. And don't confuse rest with weakness. Even a disciplined person needs recovery. Rest is not quitting. Rest can be preparation. But there is a difference between rest and escape. Rest restores you. Escape helps you avoid yourself. Learn the difference. Sometimes you need sleep. Sometimes you need silence. Sometimes you need prayer. Sometimes you need a walk. Sometimes you need to step away from the noise. And sometimes you need to stop making excuses and do the work. Wisdom is knowing which one you need. That wisdom develops when you become honest with yourself. Now, think about the person you were before some of your hardest experiences. Maybe you were more trusting, maybe more innocent, maybe more ambitious, maybe more hopeful. And then something happened. You were hurt. You were rejected. You failed. You lost. And part of you changed. Maybe you became more guarded, more cynical, more hesitant. But what if you don't have to return to the naive version of yourself? What if you can become wiser without becoming bitter? That is a powerful transformation. You don't need to become cold to become strong. You don't need to stop caring to stop being controlled. You don't need to stop loving to establish boundaries. You don't need to become cynical to become discerning. You can have a soft heart and a strong spine. You can forgive and still learn. You can trust God without trusting every person. You can love people without allowing them to destroy your peace. You can remain compassionate without remaining available to manipulation. That's maturity. And maturity is often what painful experiences are trying to teach. Now let me ask you something more personal. What are you still asking God to remove that you may need to learn how to carry differently? Maybe responsibility, maybe uncertainty, maybe patience, maybe discipline, maybe disappointment. Maybe the need for approval, maybe the fear of being alone, maybe the pressure of not knowing what happens next. There are things you cannot pray away because they are part of becoming. A muscle doesn't become stronger because you pray that weight disappears. It becomes stronger through resistance. And perhaps some resistance in your life is developing capacity, not punishment. Capacity. The ability to handle more. The ability to remain calm. The ability to think clearly. The ability to endure. The ability to serve. The ability to lead. The ability to give. The ability to carry responsibility without being crushed by it. And leadership begins with self-leadership. If you cannot lead your morning, how will you lead a team? If you cannot control your attention, how will you manage greater responsibility? If you cannot keep a promise to yourself, how will others trust your promises? If you cannot manage small resources, why would greater resources automatically make you wiser? Small responsibilities are training grounds. Treat them that way. Your room, your schedule, your finances, your health, your words, your commitments, your attention, your habits. These are not separate from your future. They are rehearsals for it. And sometimes the door you're praying for is waiting on the person you're becoming. Not because you have to earn God's love. You don't. But because certain opportunities require certain capacities. A larger platform magnifies character. More money magnifies habits. More influence magnifies motives. More responsibility magnifies discipline. Success does not automatically fix weakness. It often exposes it. So become strong before the spotlight arrives. Build when nobody is watching. Pray when nobody is listening. Work when nobody is applauding. Learn when nobody is impressed. Sit when nobody understands. Practice when nobody cares. Because when the opportunity arrives, you won't have time to become prepared from zero. Preparation will already be inside you. And that is one of the reasons your current season matters so much. You may think you're waiting for life. Life may be preparing you. You may think you're being delayed. You may be developing. You may think nothing is happening. Something may be happening where you cannot see it. And you don't need to understand every detail to continue faithfully. That is where trust becomes beautiful. Not certainty. Trust. You don't know everything, but you know enough to take the next honest step. And sometimes the next step is very small. Make the call, open the book, browse the page, do the workout, pay the bill, apologize, forgive. Turn off the screen. Wake up. Go to bed on time. Pray. Learn LOP. Repeat. It doesn't look heroic, but a heroic life is usually built from unheroic moments handled with consistency, one day at a time. One choice at a time, one temptation at a time, one prayer at a time, one act of courage at a time, and somewhere along that road, you wake up and realize, I am not the same person. Not because one speech changed you, because you practiced, you chose, you returned, you endured, you trusted, you learned, you kept moving. And there is something incredibly powerful about a person who knows they can survive their own difficult seasons. Once you've watched yourself fall and rise, something changes. You stop being terrified of failure, not because you want failure, because you know failure isn't automatically the end. You've survived disappointment. You've survived embarrassment. You've survived rejection. You've survived uncertainty. You've survived days you thought would break you. And now you have evidence. You can survive hard things. That doesn't mean you seek pain. It means you stop worshiping comfort. Comfort is not always your friend. Sometimes comfort whispers, stay here. Don't risk it. Don't try. Don't speak. Don't begin. Wait until you're ready. But readiness often comes after action. You don't become ready and then begin. Sometimes you begin, and the beginning makes you ready. Courage often arrives after the first step. Confidence often arrives after evidence. Clarity often arrives after movement. And strength often arrives after resistance. So, if you are waiting to feel completely ready, you may wait forever. There is a version of your life that requires you to move before you feel ready. And maybe that is where faith becomes practical. You don't need the whole road. You need the courage for the next step. You don't need tomorrow's strength today. You need today's strength today. Tomorrow will bring its own grace, its own challenges, its own decisions. Stop borrowing tomorrow's anxiety. You have enough responsibility for today. And when tomorrow arrives, meet it then. This is how you become mentally strong. You stop living in imaginary futures. You stop replaying imaginary conversations. You stop punishing yourself for hypothetical disasters. You return to the present. What can I do now? What is mine to handle now? What is the next right action? That question can rescue you from overwhelm. Not the entire mountain, the next step, not the entire year. Today, not your entire life. This decision. And if the next decision is right, then make another right decision. That is how a life changes. Quietly, repeatedly, almost invisibly, until suddenly the distance becomes obvious. And then one day, someone may look at you and say, "You're lucky," and you may smile because they didn't see the years. They didn't see the mornings. They didn't see the sacrifices. They didn't see the failures. They didn't see the prayers. They didn't see the discipline. They didn't see the moments when quitting would have been easier. They saw the result. You lived the process. And maybe that's okay. You don't need everyone to understand the process. You need to understand it yourself. You need to know why you kept going. You need to know what you were becoming. And perhaps one of the deepest reasons to keep going is not simply what you will receive. It's who your persistence will allow you to become for someone else. Your children may learn courage from watching you. Your family may learn resilience from watching you rebuild. Someone struggling may gain hope because they saw you refuse to surrender. Your story may become evidence to somebody else that a difficult chapter does not have to be the final identity. You may not realize who is watching. That's why your private decisions matter. Character is contagious. So is fear. So is discipline. So is bitterness. So is hope. You are always teaching people something through how you live, and perhaps your struggle has more meaning than you currently understand. Not every pain has an obvious purpose. Don't force yourself to explain everything, but you can choose to make something meaningful from what happened. You can turn pain into wisdom, wisdom into service, Dadvaifus into impact, and impact into a legacy. That is a different way of seeing suffering, not romanticizing it, not pretending it was good, but refusing to let it be meaningless. You can say, "This hurt me, but it will not own me. This broke something in me, but it will not break everything in me. I lost something, but I am still here. I was rejected, but I can still build. I failed, but I can still learn. I am afraid, but I can still move. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I don't have to know everything to trust God today." And when you reach that place, something inside you becomes difficult to shake. Not because you become emotionless, because you become anchored. You can feel deeply without being controlled deeply. You can grieve and still have hope. You can cry and still have courage. You can be uncertain and still have direction. You can be tired and still have faith. You can be disappointed and still remain grateful for what is left. That is not weakness. That is strength with depth. And perhaps that's the kind of strength you are being invited to develop. Not the loud strength, the quiet strength, the strength that doesn't need to announce itself, the strength that gets up again, the strength that keeps its word, the strength that forgives, the strength that learns, the strength that waits, the strength that walks away when necessary, the strength that stays when commitment requires staying, the strength that says no, the strength that says yes, the strength that knows when to speak, the strength that knows when to be silent, the strength that works, the strength that rests, the strength that trusts. And if you are listening right now from a place where you feel behind, understand this. Behind compared to whom? Behind according to what clock? Behind according to whose expectations? You are not required to live somebody else's timeline. Your responsibility is to be faithful with the life in front of you. You may have wasted years. Then stop wasting today. You may have made terrible decisions. Then make a better one now. You may have lost money. Then learn. You may have lost relationships. Then become wiser about relationships. You may have damaged your confidence. Then rebuild trust with yourself. You may have neglected your spiritual life. Then become intentional again. The past may explain you. It does not have to imprison you. And maybe there is a person listening who has been waiting for permission to start again. Here it is. Not permission from me. Permission from the truth that your past is not the only thing you are capable of creating. You can begin again, but beginning again does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means carrying the lesson without carrying the chains. You remember, you learn, you adjust, and you walk. There will be moments when the old version of you tries to come back. The old habit, the old fear, the old excuse, the old relationship, the old environment, the old self-talk. And when that happens, don't panic. Recognition is progress. You cannot fight what you cannot see. When you notice the pattern, you have an opportunity to interrupt it, pause, breathe, pray, choose. The gap between stimulus and response is where maturity grows. Someone says something. You don't have to answer immediately. You feel fear. You don't have to obey it immediately. You feel temptation. You don't have to act immediately. You feel discouraged. You don't have to make permanent decisions from temporary emotions. That is powerful. Never make a permanent identity out of a temporary emotion. You may feel lost today. That doesn't mean you're lost forever. You may feel weak today. That doesn't mean you are weak. You may feel behind today. That doesn't mean your story is finished. Feelings are real, but they are not always forecasts. And if you allow every emotion to become an instruction, your life will constantly change direction. Learn to feel without surrendering your steering wheel. That's emotional strength. And perhaps your faith gives you another place to put that emotion. You can pray it. You can bring your fear into the presence of God, your anger, your confusion, your disappointment, your questions, your dreams, your uncertainty. You don't have to perform strength. You can be honest. There is something freeing about not pretending. You can say, I am scared. I don't understand. I am tired. I don't know what to do. And then still say, but I will take the next step. That is courage. Courage doesn't require you to feel powerful. Sometimes courage sounds like a whisper. Sometimes courage is simply refusing to quit tonight. Sometimes courage is getting up tomorrow. Sometimes courage is asking for help. Sometimes courage is admitting you need to change. Sometimes courage is walking away. Sometimes courage is staying. You will have to learn which one your season requires. And that takes discernment. Not every battle deserves your energy. Not every opportunity deserves your attention. Not every relationship deserves access. Not every dream deserves pursuit. And not every closed door needs to be forced open. There are times when surrender is not defeat. Surrender is wisdom. You can work hard without trying to control everything. You can be ambitious without being desperate. You can pursue without worshiping the outcome. You can give your best and still release the result. That is one of the deepest forms of freedom. Do your work. Give your best. Then let God handle what you cannot. Because if your peace depends on controlling the outcome, you will never have peace. There will always be another variable, another person, another market, another decision, another uncertainty, another possibility. Control is an illusion when applied to everything. Responsibility is real focus on responsibility. And maybe that's what being unstoppable really means. Not that nothing can stop you physically. Life can stop a plan. Circumstances can change. People can leave. Markets can shift. Bodies can become tired. Plans can fail. Doors can close. Being unstoppable means something deeper. It means circumstances may change your route without destroying your reason to keep walking. It means you can bend without breaking. You can adapt without abandoning your values. You can restart without shame. You can grieve without giving up. You can wait without becoming bitter. You can fail without becoming a failure. You can lose without losing yourself. And when your identity is rooted deeper than your circumstances, you become very difficult to defeat, because defeat is no longer defined as something went wrong. Defeat becomes, I decided I would never rise again. And you don't have to make that decision. You can rise again, slowly if necessary, with tears if necessary, with help if necessary. But rise. Take the next breath, take the next step, make the next call, learn the next lesson, keep the next promise, pray the next prayer, do the next right thing. And sometimes that's all faith asks of you in a difficult moment, not a 10-year plan, the next step, and perhaps tomorrow will make more sense after you take it. Perhaps the door after the next door will not appear until you walk through this one. Perhaps the strength you are asking for is already being developed through the resistance you wish would disappear. Perhaps the person you are becoming is being formed in the very season you keep asking to escape. And perhaps one day, when you look backward, you will see connections you could never see while standing inside the struggle. You'll remember the delay, the disappointment, the closed door, the unexpected conversation, the decision you almost didn't make. And you'll realize that one small choice changed the direction of everything that followed. That's why today matters. Not because today must be spectacular. Because today is connected. Today connects to tomorrow. Tomorrow connects to next year. Next year connects to the person you become. And the person you become changes what you are capable of carrying. So don't underestimate this moment simply because it looks ordinary. You are standing at the intersection of who you have been and who you could become. There is still time to change direction. There is still time to learn. There is still time to rebuild. There is still time to forgive. There is still time to become disciplined. There is still time to become financially responsible. There is still time to strengthen your mind. There is still time to deepen your faith. There is still time to become someone you respect. And perhaps the greatest danger is not failure. Perhaps the greatest danger is becoming comfortable with a life that you know is smaller than what you are capable of living. Comfort can become quiet captivity. You get used to it. You adjust. You lower expectations. You call it realism. You say, this is just how life is. Maybe not. Maybe this is simply how life has been because of repeated decisions. And if repeated decisions helped create the current chapter, new repeated decisions can create another. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually, faithfully, intentionally. And as you change your daily life, your internal life begins changing too. You begin respecting yourself, not because you became perfect, because you became trustworthy to yourself. You say you'll do something. You do it. You say you'll stop something. You stop. You say you'll learn. You learn. You say you'll pray. You pray. You say you'll forgive. You begin forgiving. Every kept promise becomes another brick. And eventually you stand inside a character you built one decision at a time. Then when the storm comes, you don't have to manufacture strength. The structure is already there. The storm reveals the foundation. And perhaps that's why some people look surprisingly calm in situations that would terrify others. They are not necessarily less afraid. They have built deeper foundations. They have practiced trust. They have practiced discipline. They have practiced patience. They have practiced returning. They have practiced letting go. And practice changes people. So practice courage in small situations. Practice saying no. Practice keeping promises. Practice sitting with discomfort. Practice being alone without being lonely. Practice turning off distractions. Practice doing difficult things without announcing them. Practice gratitude. Practice prayer. Practice patience. Practice starting again. Because when the major test comes, you will fall back on what you practiced in the small moments. And there may be a major test. There may be a season that asks more from you than you thought you had. When it comes, don't immediately assume you are abandoned. Ask, what is required of me now? Not forever. Now, what is required today? What is the honest thing? What is the courageous thing? What is the wise thing? What is the next step? And then take it. You may shake. Take it. You may cry. Take it. You may not feel ready. Take it. You may not understand. Take it. You may wish someone else would rescue you. Take the step anyway, because sometimes you discover your strength only after you stop waiting to feel strong. And there is something else. You are allowed to receive help. Being unstoppable does not mean doing everything alone. Sometimes God answers a prayer through another person, a mentor, a friend, a teacher, a counselor, a family member, a stranger, a conversation, a book, an opportunity, a correction. Don't let pride make you reject the help you need. Strength is not refusing help. Strength is knowing when help is wise. The person who thinks they must do everything alone eventually becomes exhausted. The person who knows when to receive support can go farther. But choose carefully. Not everyone who offers help has wisdom. Discernment again. Ask questions. Observe character. Don't be desperate enough to trust anyone. Your desperation can make a bad opportunity look like an answer. Wait. Think, pray, then move. And if something doesn't work, learn. You don't need every attempt to succeed. You need every attempt to teach. That mindset can change everything. Instead of asking, did I win? Ask, what did I learn? Instead of, did they accept me? Ask, what did this reveal? Instead of, did I get the opportunity? Ask, what can I improve before the next one? That is how rejection becomes information instead of identity. And information can make you better. Maybe you are closer than you think. Maybe the skill you need is 1 year of practice away. Maybe the discipline you need is built through the next 100 ordinary mornings. Maybe the financial stability you want is connected to learning one valuable skill. Maybe the relationship you want requires becoming emotionally healthier first. Maybe the peace you want requires letting go of something you keep revisiting. Maybe the answer you are waiting for begins with a responsibility you already know. And perhaps that is why you should stop waiting for a dramatic revelation. Sometimes the next instruction is already obvious. You just don't like it. You know you need to sleep earlier. You know you need to stop wasting hours. You know you need to learn. You know you need to save. You know you need to apologize. You know you need to leave. You know you need to start. You know you need to stop. And the question is not always, what is God's will for my entire life? Sometimes the question is, what do I already know is right? And why am I avoiding it? That's a powerful question. Sit with it. Because your next level may not require more information. It may require obedience to the information you already have. And when you begin doing that, you discover something. Clarity often follows obedience, not always immediately, but movement reveals information. Action exposes reality. You learn what works. You learn what doesn't. You learn what needs adjustment. And slowly the fog begins to clear. You don't need to see 10 miles ahead. You need enough clarity for the next mile, and then the next, and then another. This is how you walk through uncertainty without becoming paralyzed. One step, one day, one decision, one prayer, one lesson, one recovery, one act of courage. And while you're walking, something is changing. Not just your circumstances. Your tolerance for excuses decreases. Your appreciation for discipline increases. Your need for approval decreases. Your capacity for responsibility increases. Your relationship with failure changes. Your relationship with time changes. Your relationship with God deepens. And you begin to understand that strength isn't something you find. It is something you develop through resistance, through responsibility, through repetition, through faith, through truth, through choices. And maybe that is why your difficult season cannot automatically be called your enemy. It may be uncomfortable, it may be unfair, it may be painful, but it can still become part of your formation. You don't have to love the season to learn from it. You don't have to understand it to grow through it. You don't have to pretend it didn't hurt. You simply refuse to let the hurt have the final word about who you are. You are still becoming. There are chapters you haven't read yet. There are skills you haven't learned. There are people you haven't met. There are places you haven't seen. There are prayers you haven't prayed. There are responsibilities you haven't carried. There are versions of yourself you haven't discovered. So be careful when you say, this is all my life will ever be. You don't know that. You are standing too close to the chapter. Step back. Breathe. Keep walking. The story is larger than today's paragraph. And perhaps somewhere ahead, there is a version of you who will be grateful that you did not quit during this season. That future version will remember you. The you who almost stopped. The you who almost surrendered. The you who almost believed the rejection. The you who almost accepted the excuse. And maybe that future you is depending on today's you to make one decision differently. Just one. Then another tomorrow. Then another. That's how lives change. Not always with a dramatic miracle. Sometimes through thousands of ordinary acts of faithfulness. And there is something beautiful about that because it means you don't have to become extraordinary tonight. You simply have to become faithful with what is in front of you. The next hour, the next decision, the next responsibility, the next opportunity to choose courage over fear. And perhaps tomorrow will ask something different. You will meet tomorrow when it arrives. For now, there is this moment, this breath, this decision, this unfinished story. And somewhere inside you, beneath the fear, beneath the disappointment, beneath the years of doubt, there is still a part of you that knows you were not created merely to survive every day in fear of what might happen. There is a part of you that still wants to rise, still wants to build, still wants to learn, still wants to love, still wants to serve, still wants to create, still wants to become. And maybe you have been trying to silence that part because hoping again feels dangerous. But hope is not a guarantee that everything will happen exactly as you imagine. Hope is the refusal to believe that today's circumstances are the entire truth about tomorrow. And faith goes deeper. Faith says you can walk forward even when tomorrow is hidden. So walk, not because you know everything. Walk because you know enough. Walk with humility. Walk with discipline. Walk with courage. Walk with prayer. Walk with patience. Walk when nobody applauds. Walk when progress is invisible. Walk when the road changes. Walk when the plan changes. Walk when you have to begin again. And if you stumble, don't build a house on the ground where you fell. Get up. Learn. Add just me. Because the ground remembers where you fell, but it does not have the authority to decide where you go next. There will be another morning, another decision, another opportunity, another chance to practice the person you say you want to become. And perhaps the next time fear whispers, what if you fail? You will have a different question. What if I learn? What if I grow? What if I become stronger? What if the door I cannot see yet is connected to the step I am afraid to take? And perhaps when the future is uncertain, you will stop demanding a complete map. You will look at the next step. And when the next step is difficult, you will remember that difficulty does not automatically mean wrong direction. Sometimes the road is hard because the destination requires a stronger traveler. Sometimes the waiting is long because the lesson is deep. Sometimes the door remains closed because another door is not ready. Sometimes the answer is delayed because your capacity is still developing. Sometimes what you call a setback is simply a chapter you have not yet learned how to read. And sometimes you will never know the reason. You will have to trust anyway. That is where faith becomes more than an idea. It becomes the way you stand when you cannot see, the way you breathe when you cannot control, the way you continue when you cannot guarantee, the way you remain grateful without pretending, the way you remain hopeful without demanding certainty, the way you keep your heart open without becoming careless, the way you keep moving without knowing every detail. And maybe one day you will realize that being unstoppable was never about becoming a person whom nothing could hurt. It was about becoming a person whom pain could not permanently define, a person who could lose and still love, fall and still rise, wait and still trust, fail and still learn, cry and still continue, be rejected and still respect themselves, be misunderstood and still remain honest, be afraid and still take the step. And maybe standing there in the middle of everything you once thought would destroy you, you will recognize something you could not see at the beginning. The strength was not always in the circumstances changing. Sometimes the strength was being formed in you while you were asking for the circumstances to change, and there may still be mountains ahead. There may still be questions. There may still be doors you haven't reached. There may still be days when you wonder what happens next. But you do not have to know the entire story to remain faithful to the next sentence. You do not have to see the whole road to take the next step. You do not have to feel unstoppable to keep moving. You only have to refuse to surrender your future to fear. And perhaps tonight, tomorrow morning, or in the middle of some ordinary afternoon, you will face one of those small moments that nobody else will recognize as important. A choice, an excuse, a temptation, a responsibility. A chance to tell the truth, a chance to work, a chance to pray, a chance to stop, a chance to begin. And nobody may know which choice you made. Nobody may applaud. Nobody may even notice. But you will know. And God will know. And that small decision will become part of the person you are building. Then another decision, then another. And slowly, quietly, beneath the noise of the world, beneath the opinions, beneath the delays, beneath the fear, something stronger begins to take shape. Because when you stop asking whether the road will always be easy and start asking whether you are willing to keep walking with faith, discipline, courage, and trust, when you stop demanding that every door open immediately and start preparing yourself for the doors that may open later, when you stop allowing yesterday's failure to speak for tomorrow's possibility, when you stop treating fear as a command, when you stop confusing delay with denial, when you stop measuring your life by somebody else's clock, when you stop waiting for perfect conditions, when you start honoring small commitments, when you start protecting your mind, when you start becoming responsible for what is actually in your hands, when you begin to understand that faith is not the absence of uncertainty, but the courage to move through uncertainty, then something inside you begins to stand differently. And perhaps the next challenge will still be difficult. Perhaps your hands will still shake. Perhaps your heart will still race. Perhaps you will still have questions. But you will look at the road in front of you differently, because you will know that you don't need to control the entire journey. You need to remain faithful to the step that is in front of you. And then, when that step becomes the past, there will be another one waiting, and another, and another,